One of the things that makes anime so difficult to discuss is that much like Hollywood films or Western literature, an anime can have a storyline that's from any and every type of genre imaginable. Anime is more of a medium than a genre within a medium. This is an important thing to establish when talking about adaptations and how one story can be interpreted differently through one type of medium or another, and one may or may not be more preferable to experience that type of storyline. The difference between story and storytelling. If I'm being honest, I'm really not that big of an anime fan, at least not a die-hard one that will watch whatever is coming out regardless of what genre it's a part of. I typically tend to stick with the same types of genres, so it's pretty easy to tell if a show will or will not appeal to me.
2010 was a very important year for me as an anime fan. This was the year I watched many series that were very impactful to me and my tastes. Series like Trigun, Baccano, Soul Eater, Gankutsuou, some of my favorite anime series of all time, and I watched them for the first time this year. My best friend at the time told me about a series she was watching called Fate Stay Night, and insisted that I watch it as well, saying she had recalled seeing specifically this image of the blonde-haired, blue-clad protagonist years earlier, and something about her resonated with my friend so much that she remembered seeing this image years later when finally discovering the series.
I have a very vivid and fond memory of watching this series over the spring of 2010. Little did I know back then how polarizing this series was from the eyes of its viewers. Fans of the visual novel hated this series, but people that weren't familiar with the visual novel rated it from mediocre to above average. I distinctly remember reading an Anime News Network article about this series back when it was first coming out, and I remember them saying something along the lines of, this series has so many good things going for it, and so many things going wrong for it all at the same time, that you simply must continue to watch it, if not for just a morbid curiosity's sake. I'm not the kind of person that hates on English dubs if they're done well, and in fact, even though I said in the previous video that all of the Japanese voice actors would continue to reprise their roles in every Fate adaptation afterwards, I'm actually going to be reviewing this in the dub because I feel like the dub has enough quality to be worth talking about. I already said in the previous video we would be assessing this anime purely based on its own merits as an anime and not as an adaptation of the visual novel, although I probably will make comparisons here and there for the sake of justifying my watch order like I talked about. We know the visual novel is the superior medium to tell this story, but like I said in the previous video, this anime does have some storytelling advantages that I'd like to go into. And as far as the topic of how to get into Fate, I couldn't disagree more with the people that insist on skipping this series. So, without further ado, let's find out, what does this series get wrong? And more importantly, what does it get right? This is Fate Stay Night 2006 by Studio Deen.
One of the most impactful aspects of the visual novel and its tone is how the atmosphere and mood captures your immersion. On a technical level, one of the anime's strongest merits is how it absolutely nails the atmosphere. The dynamic use of lighting and shot composition is extremely well done. Great use of moonlight and colors during sunsets create a creepy and unsettling atmosphere that emphasizes the inevitability of the dangerous conflicts with unknown forces that will undoubtedly happen at night. This offers a stark contrast to the daytime shots that are colorful and extremely well lit, offering a soft comfort and a whimsical reprieve from the violence that happens at nighttime. If I have one gripe with the visuals, is that it sometimes looks like there's a filter digitally added to create a soft glow over the top of the screen to represent a light source, and it does look a little awkward at times, but for its time, it looks very well done overall. The fight choreography is also very well done and easy to follow, and the fights are exciting. Barring a few simple shots of animation where they try to save frames and the recycle animation of Saber's overhead swing, the animation holds up pretty well overall.
I hear a lot of people criticize the animation in this series, calling it dated, but you really do have to fairly assess it based on the merits of animation from 2006, because compared to its contemporaries, it doesn't look bad. Not to mention, 2007 is when anime went to HD, and shortly after that is when we started getting the awkward era of mostly CG anime that's still heavily prevalent to this day, so I will take what I can get for this series in terms of the visuals department.
It's certainly going to age better than the animation in Apocrypha, but just wait until we get to the video on that. This series has absolutely beautiful hand-drawn backgrounds and goes through some great lengths to recreate certain frames from the visual novel. even though it also goes through some awkward lengths to include some of the visual effects shots in the visual novel that were more there for abstract purposes due to the visual novel's limitations to kind of interpret what was going on. These didn't really need to be included. The way that Studio Deen decides to draw the characters can be questionable at times as well, considering they sometimes draw them with the whole James from Team Rocket syndrome of their hair going behind their eyes. But overall, the way they're drawn offers this series its own visual style without straying too far from the iconic Type Moon look.
Something far less controversial is the audio. The soundtrack comes to us from Kenji Kawai of famed Ghost in the Shell and Patlabor credit. Not only does he give us an objectively good soundtrack, but it's also one whose themes and style fit very closely with the visual novel soundtrack.
This is a point that I'm planning to bring up again when we talk about some of the later Fate works, but music adds so much to a scene. It establishes your tone, mood, and emotions you're supposed to be feeling, and having a scene be completely silent, barring dialogue and ambient sound effects, is a great way to get your audience to tune out of the exposition you're delivering. The soundtrack in this series is always noticeable and pleasant, making the scenes with pointless comic relief or meaningless exposition that much better. Even the opening for the series, Disillusion, is a cover of the original visual novel opening as well.
While some of the line delivery can be a little stilted and not great, the casting for the dub is great overall, with Sam Riegel playing Shiro, whom I've gotten used to playing villain characters at this point, and Archer being voiced by Liam O'Brien, and the two of them share some of the same vocal mannerisms, which will be funnier for reasons later down the road in the plot.
I've heard some people be very critical of Kate Hidgen's delivery as Saber, and even though it can sound a little stilted sometimes, she does hit all the right marks, and she sounds fierce when she needs to, and also sounds gentle and graceful when she needs to.
I am Saber, your servant. I have come in response to your summons. And you are my master, correct?
Lancer is voiced by Tony Oliver, who would later go on to be the dub director for future Fate adaptations.
You know what they say about dead men telling no tales.
Jameson Price voices Kireko Tamine, and my god does this man do exposition better than anyone else. Screw Morgan Freeman, this guy can narrate my life.
Rejoice, my son. You have a chance to make your dreams come true. You need a distinguishable enemy to see your dream come to fruition.
I've had some very specific and detailed points I wanted to make about this series for a very long time, and yet here we are, finally, about to make this video, and I'm still torn and uncertain about how I want to approach the story. I feel like the best way I can do this and still summarize all the points I want to make is to go through it linearly, episode by episode. I addressed the merits of the production quality in the beginning, but I'm going to have to address the criticisms with the story and its portrayal as they come up. So let's begin with the first episode.
We begin with a very anime fight scene. I had completely forgotten about this scene when I first watched the series because it was never in the visual novel at all for reasons I'm sure the audience is already aware of, but that'll come up again later on. We then cut to 10 years later and see a young mage getting ready to perform a magic ritual. This summoning incantation varies widely from translation to translation, but I feel like here in the Deen anime is the weakest translation we've had in a Fate anime.
I had to have drawn the most powerful card. I know it.
Fantastic. It's just my luck. I've been drawn by a peculiar little master.
I feel like the whole card and drawn thing was something that the dub just threw in there because it's never referenced again, almost like they thought the concept of servants in the Holy Grail War will be based around some kind of card battle system or whatever. Next, we're finally introduced to our protagonist, Shiro Illya, and through a few simple but effective scenes, we understand what happened to him as a child and his relationship with his adoptive father, Kiritsugu.
His name is Kiritsugu Emiya. He died 5 years ago. Even though he lived in this huge samurai compound, he had no other living relatives. So, when he died, this entire estate went to me, his adopted son.
In spite of the fact that Shiro inherited this massive estate all to himself, he definitely does not live alone.
Hold up. It's rude to make people wait for you, you know.
She's another one of Dad's friends. I know Sakura through a friend of mine at school. She's his kid sister. When I got hurt about a year ago, she started coming over and cooking for me. Eventually I got better, but she never stopped coming by to help out.
The harem elements are already kind of starting to show, but I do applaud this series for its maturity in the way that it handles it, and the reasons why Sakura and Fujimura live with him don't feel contrived or forced at all. There's actually legitimately well-explained reasons for it. Sakura seems like an unimportant character who's very shallow and one-dimensional in this route, but the one thing you have to remember about that is that this is not her route. There's a lot more to her than meets the eye, but we won't get into that until much further down the road. I know the inclusion of these sort of comic relief characters like Fujimura may seem like a bit of an annoyance here, and it kind of is, but that's the reason why you start with this anime, so that when you get to the other anime adaptations that feature these characters, they've already endeared themselves to you and you already know what they're about. Now, I hear some people have their own rules about an episode rule with how many episodes you continue to watch a series before you give it up or you decide if it's worth continuing. So I have my own version of that, and it's the 4-episode rule. So a series has to establish 4 things in 4 episodes: characters, character motivation, setting, and plot. Luckily, Fate Stay Night does accomplish all of these things, although some people's patience was probably wearing thin when Saber doesn't even make an appearance until the 3rd episode.
And of course, every plot-relevant character has to go to the same school together. Wouldn't be an anime if we didn't have that.
She's in the 11th grade, has a pretty face, nice body, and a great mind. She has 0 enemies, and if you ask every guy who he'd like to go out with if he had a choice, he'd say Rin Tosaka.
The way she's dressed just screams I'm a main character, mainly because anime always puts more attention to detail on plot-relevant characters when drawing school settings. She even goes and sits down in the main character seat. Rin is the only living heir to the very old and prestigious family of mages, the Tosakas. She's been chosen to partake in the Holy Grail War as a master. She's a little salty that the servant she summoned wasn't the knight-type Saber-class servant, but she still continues to test and assess the capabilities of her Archer-class servant nonetheless. I'm sure this will come up again later, but one of my favorite aspects of this storyline, and therefore this anime, is that the characters actually spend quite a lot of time strategizing and assessing the threats and situations that they may come up against. This is an unfortunate but necessary inclusion, being that this is a visual novel adaptation. See, because a novel or a visual novel only has words to convey information, character dialogue is just that much more important. Conversations are much more drawn out with a lot more detail being exchanged between the characters than you would if it was just a traditional anime or a film. This is one of those elements so commonly lost when translating a novel to a film or vice versa because of how it affects the pacing. Here in Fate Stay Night, these conversations are paced pretty well and don't bog down the story with too much boring exposition. Overall, the series handles it very well.
Sometimes some of this can come across as a little bit too much in-universe jargon, but trust me, it's way better than some of the absolute word vomit that comes out of a lot of modern anime these days. But again, that's a video for another time.
Rin has a bit of a pride complex and is gravely offended when she finds out that Archer doesn't have any of his memories from who he was or what era of history he comes from. His reason being that Rin allegedly summoned him improperly. We get a glimpse of Shiro's unique but limited understanding of magic in these first 2 episodes, where he feels and reads the material makeup of an object and he can fully understand how it works, making him quite the handyman. This ties into his willingness to go out of his way to selflessly help anyone in need, even when sometimes those people come to him on purpose to take advantage of his generosity.
Well, we've got a little favor we want you to do for us. See, the archery dojo is in serious need of a cleaning right now. I'd do it if I had the time, but I'm just swamped.
Enter Shinji Mato, Sakura's older brother, and the most vile and despicable character in this entire series.
And of course, Shiro, being who he is, willingly sacrifices his free time to clean the dojo, and ends up staying long after school hours. Rin, thinking that another master was on the school premises that day, decided to stay after hours as well, and is approached by an enemy servant.
I take it from your weapon that you're a Lancer servant.
You guessed it. Now, this servant of yours doesn't look like the type who's into close-quarter combat.
Archer and Lancer duke it out, and the ensuing chaos attracts the attention of Shiro nearby. Unfortunately, a rule of the Grail War is they're only supposed to fight at night, so there won't be any witnesses. So if someone does witness a servant battle, they should be killed. Lancer, knowing this all too well, executes Shiro. Rin takes responsibility for his death, feeling like it was her carelessness that put him in the situation to begin with. So she uses the powerful magic in her family heirloom to revive him.
That choice is mine. I still have plenty of those gems. There's no need for me to be stingy with them.
Rin is straight up lying to him here because she knows that gem is one of a kind.
Rin realizes that it's only a matter of time before Lancer catches on that Shiro isn't dead. How this happens, we're never really quite sure. I don't think it's ever established how Lancer finds out that Shiro is revived, but sure enough, he does actually track Shiro down to his estate, and goes after him once again. Right before Shiro is about to be taken out for the second time, a flash of bright light appears behind him and a beautiful woman with blonde hair emerges.
I am Saber, your servant. I have come in response to your summons. And you are my master, correct?
And as is per tradition with anime, the otherwise unlikely, completely average protagonist discovers his magical destiny and ends up getting a one-of-a-kind advantage in fights to come. It's Amuro discovering the Gundam, so to speak. But in spite of that, this story actually goes to great efforts to make this cliché more bearable and doesn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls commonly associated with this trope. Saber immediately rushes to defend her new master from the threat of the enemy servant. Lancer plays his hand a little too recklessly and reveals his true identity as a heroic spirit. Saber recognizes the legendary spear Gay Bolg and calls out Cuckoo Lane almost immediately.
And that spear is only handled by the Hound of Kulan.
I hate that. Every time I use that attack, I run the risk of exposing myself.
A minor lore thing that's just kind of glanced over here is the fact that the Gay Bolg's ability to seek out its target usually makes it a guaranteed kill. It was just through the merits of Saber's magic resistance and her luck stat that enabled her to survive.
Lancer reveals that he was only on a scouting mission and has been given specific orders not to go all out, so therefore he retreats. And Saber, being still hungry for a fight, goes after Rin and Archer. Rin has to withdraw him with a command seal because he's woefully outmatched against Saber's raw physical strength. Rin throws a magic jewel at Saber, and she shrugs it off without even acknowledging it. Again, this series is establishing a lot of lore-relevant information about the setting without a ton of exposition. It's showing and not telling. I don't think it's ever said out loud that the Saber class has high resistance to magic in this anime, but when we see it happen on screen, it doesn't have to be. Shiro, of course, refuses to allow Saber to kill Rin, even though she points out to him that it would be strategically advantageous for them to do so. Rin is blown away by the fact that Saber, the strongest servant, not only refused to manifest itself to her, but chose to be summoned to a literal nobody with no magical training. She takes pity on him, and since it was her fault he got hurt earlier, brings him to the Holy Church so she can get a rundown by the supervisor, in the biggest exposition dump in the story so far. This scene in the church is usually one of my favorite scenes in every adaptation of Fate Stay Night. I quite enjoy it because it serves a different purpose depending on if you know the story or not. For first-time viewers, it helps establish the rules of the Grail War in an easy-to-follow way. For those of you who already know the entire story, you can read further into these interactions and discover a lot more nuance.
Alright, I think it goes without saying that you should expect full and total spoilers from Fate Stay Night from here onward, so if you don't know any of the things that are about to happen, consider this your formal warning.
We know that certain things Kirei tells Shiro are true while others are not, but but the things that he tells him that are not true are not that way because of bad writing, it's a deliberate choice on behalf of the character. Kirei has Shiro pretty well figured out at this point. He can tell what motivates and drives him, and he knows how to appeal to his sensibilities. So by telling him that the mages have no stake in who wins the Grail, regardless of their morality or what atrocities they plan to commit with it, is a way to convince Shiro that he can stop a great tragedy or defeat a great evil by fighting. Even though Kirei knows from the Fourth Grail War that the Mages Association has made decisions in the past to gang up on a particular master if they thought the collateral damage or public safety risk would be too great. The part where Kirei says he will guarantee the safety of a servantless master is true, according to the official rules, but he is under no obligation to keep that promise, being that he's the sole supervisor of this current war. By telling Shiro that Kirei himself is living proof, if you decide to avoid fighting, that the Grail will not manifest to you, helps build credibility to his claim that Shiro's only option is to be brave and fight.
Will you or will you not be a master in the Holy Grail Wars?
I'll do it.
No sooner than when Shiro and Rin walk outside the church are they greeted by a brand new adversary even more threatening than the last. This is Illya, and that massive hulking servant of hers is the Berserker class. With Archer still injured from the previous battle, Saber is left to fight this beast one-on-one.
One of the flaws with the script of this series is they tend to throw around the term strongest and most powerful servant quite a lot without really taking the time to explain what that means.
To explain better, the Berserker class is definitely the strongest in terms of physical strength, but is limited to simple types of attacks without a lot of variation. The Saber class is more well-rounded overall and has better passive abilities. Of course, a lot of these abilities vary depending on the servant, because their heroic identity often ties into their abilities, since those abilities are often derived from their legend. Shiro's hero complex rears its ugly head, and he can't force himself to stand by and watch the pretty lady get hurt. He pushes Saber out of the way, only to be nearly split in half by Berserker's sword.
What were you thinking, running in there like that? You idiot! Did you really think you were gonna be able to save her?
You guys starting to see a pattern with this series yet? Shiro spends a lot of time lying in a heap.
I originally thought when I saw this scene that Saber's eyes turned red because she was bleeding out of them, but then to see her eyes turn back to blue and her expression soften up on screen made me think that maybe Berserker had the ability to inflict the Berserk status onto an enemy like it's a freaking Final Fantasy game, considering how Shiro also sees red after he's struck, but this is never stated in canon, it's just kind of a funny observation. Rather than finish them off, Illya gets bored, mocking Shiro for his incompetence and simply leaving.
The next morning, Shiro wakes up to be, well, perfectly fine, much to the confusion of Rin.
Rin believes that Shiro's pact with Saber allows him to heal wounds incredibly quickly. The downside being that it drains her mana, and without the knowledge to supply her with more, the two of them are fighting on limited fuel and will eventually burn out if they have to fall back on this as a strategy. Shiro is stubbornly on his back foot about fighting, but Rin has to remind him that Saber is going to fight without him if he refuses, because she has more at stake here, including her own wish that she wants to have granted by the Grail, as all servants do. Shiro finds that Saber slept the day away in low power mode to allocate her mana to healing her own injuries. Again, a process that could easily be expedited if Shiro was a competent master. Shiro has no choice but to introduce Saber to Sakura and Taiga, since she can't take her spirit form like most servants can, and they'll find out about her eventually if he doesn't. The outraged Taiga doesn't take kindly to this and puts together an arbitrary test of might for Saber to prove that she's qualified to live with Shiro and gain Taiga's approval.
Say your prayers! Oh.
Now, if this were a true harem anime, it wouldn't be able to let a joke like this go. It would constantly be reoccurring, or all the other girls would constantly be showing him jealousy in regards to the one that keeps getting the most attention, or they would just be teasing him over the existence of Saber endlessly. Thankfully, we just get a short comic relief scene, the series lets it go and moves on. Admittedly, these first few episodes are pretty cluttered with these comic relief type scenes, but there's definitely a distinct point in the story in which it starts to ramp things up and stays pretty consistently on task from then onward about actually telling its story.
Rin appears outwardly disgusted by Shiro's naivety, and Archer accosts her for taking pity on him when she has a job to do, as it's detrimental to her goal to put herself at risk defending someone so weak and incompetent. Rin reassures him that given the opportunity when they next meet, she'll start taking things seriously and kill him off. Rin finds her opportunity right away since Shiro again can't help himself but to stay late at school again. Rin half-assed chases Shiro through the school in an attempt to kill him, but she's so tsundere we know she doesn't actually want him to get hurt. Luckily for Rin, some other drama occurs just in the nick of time to give her the perfect excuse to not pursue attacking him. Looks like one student still remains on the premises and they appear to be injured.
What just happened?
Looks like the master and servant that Rin detected at the school on the first day are finally deciding to play their hand. Shiro thinks he's hunting the enemy servant, when in fact he's being lured into a trap.
There'll be no escaping. Well, aren't you brave? Do you always choose the most painful option available to you?
They determine that the servant must not be too much of a threat in terms of raw physical strength, as she flees immediately when Rin comes and gets involved. Realizing there's still an enemy they mutually have to defeat, Rin takes Shiro back to her place to heal up his arm, solidifying their temporary alliance. He then returns home to find Saber rightfully upset.
You really do have to admire Saber's patience here. They just got done agreeing that if he were in any danger he would call her, and yet he stayed late at the school anyway, endangering himself and almost getting killed by a servant they've never even encountered before.
Shenanigans ensue again when Rin shows up to walk to school with him, just as he got done telling Sakura he would walk with her.
Now, as much as I hate the misunderstanding trope in storytelling, this scene is really commendable. It eliminates a genre cliche that anime was just overwhelmed with at the time, and maintains this series' commitment to no shenanigans allowed.
Shiro and Rin refuse to allow Saber to go to school with them, eliminating the possibility for any fish-out-of-water and magical girlfriend genre cliches, which goes to show you how much this series is committed to not being cliché. Any other anime would have had Saber go to school with them and cause all kinds of chaos and secondhand embarrassment for him. Now that Rin is walking to school with him, she can explain to him this weird sensation he's been feeling every time he walks onto the school premises lately. It's likely the work of a magic barrier that another master has put up around the school as a dormant trap. So the two of them decide to stay late that day, on purpose this time, to identify and destroy the magic sigils that anchor that barrier in place. As soon as the two part ways, Shiro's weird feeling comes back with a vengeance. Upon further investigation, he discovers another sigil unlike any of the others they found that day.
Shinji.
I can take it from here, Ryder.
Looks like Shinji's a master too, go figure. The Rider class is sort of like your Cavalier or a Monster Tamer class, depending on which hero it is that represents that servant. Magic barriers are used pretty commonly throughout the Type Moon universe for various different reasons. This one appears to be used to drain the life force out of the students in the school to not only strengthen Shinji's servant, but also to take out the oblivious Shiro and Rin in the process.
Rather than start a fight this time around, Shinji and Ryder invite Shiro to come with them to negotiate an alliance.
Why does everybody want an alliance with this loser?
Shiro finds Shinji morally detestable for obvious reasons, and so he declines his offer for a partnership. He returns home to, once again, find Rin and Saber rightfully pissed off at him.
Alright, I don't think I can reasonably go much further without explaining one of the biggest pros and cons of this anime as an adaptation. You see, in the visual novel, you're locked into the first-person perspective of the character you're playing as. You can only see and observe things as that character is seeing and observing them.
The Rialto Nua version of the visual novel had a prologue chapter through Rin's perspective, so we're forced to see the same events of the first day twice from two different perspectives. In the anime, the first two episodes change perspectives from Shiro to Rin and back again, so it happens naturally, because we're not locked into the first person. The downside with this is because we're not able to hear everything that Shiro is thinking and truly understand his thought process, we're not really able to understand him or his actions on the same level if it was the visual novel.
This ends up being one of the biggest issues with this anime. Shiro Emiya is really, really annoying.
Listen, all this stuff about Masters and Grail Wars, I don't understand any of it. Just because one person can win doesn't mean you gotta kill all the Masters in the process. Servants go around eating people?
The only thing I ask you guys to remember is that this is only just the normal Fate route. We don't have the luxury of the player having played through the other routes to understand better what's going on. This should optimally be the very first time not only the character, but us as the viewer have experienced these scenarios.
The conversation with Shiro and Kirei at the church is very different in the anime adaptations of the other two story routes. And they have to be. The anime has to use this scene to contextualize Shiro's level of understanding of the stakes and his own responsibilities in this war, whereas in the visual novel, your understanding of the stakes and events develops with the character as you, the player, progress linearly through the three story routes, so it all works out. Moving on, Shiro reveals that Shinji told him about a master taking refuge at Ryudo Temple, the place his schoolmate Issei lives. Issei confirmed this by stating his father has been harboring a mysterious woman in the compound. Shiro also is quick to point out that he doesn't necessarily feel like Ryder belongs with Shinji very well.
A master and their servant tend to be cut from the same cloth. In other words, if a master is pure of heart, then the servant he or she summons will be of a similar inclination. If the master carries deep psychological wounds, then their servant will also carry those same scars. A master with a twisted mind will quite often call up a servant with a vicious taste for blood. What Shiro was probably picking up on was that there seems to be a huge disparity between this particular master and servant.
This is one of my favorite analogies in this adaptation. We know that this isn't always true, especially when we look at other master-servant pairings in other Fate works, but what it does do is set up some very heavy foreshadowing for one of the other routes without being too on the nose about it. Rin made it very clear to Shiro earlier that servants have their own agenda, and when it comes to the Grail War, at the end of the day, they have a wish they want to have granted too, and sure enough, Saber has too much on the line to put up with Shiro's ineptitude and decides to investigate the master at the Ryudo Temple on her own.
Personally, names aren't something I find to be relevant. You see, for people like us, only our swords need to know our opponents. That's the true role of a servant, isn't it?
The gate to the Ryudo Temple is guarded by a new type of servant, Assassin. Here's where we get to see Saber's traditional sense of honor and respect here on full display, as the two of them engage in some polite banter and have a proper duel.
But something seems to be amiss. That can't be all you've got. I find it hard to believe that your invisible blade is just a gimmick.
This fight serves as a distraction to allow the nearby rider to sneak into the compound. The mage notices her right away and chases her away with magic. Shiro awakens in the middle of the night to realize Saber is not at home. Realizing where she probably went off to, he heads to Ryudo Temple immediately. He arrives just in time to find Saber charging her ultimate attack.
Typhoon Force Wind Saber, very impressive. But there's more to it than this, isn't there? Come on, show me what you have in that light.
This fight ends when he makes her withdraw. It's pretty evident that her ultimate attack must take an incredible amount of energy, which she doesn't have because she collapses right after the fight. After the same rehashed argument of Shiro not wanting Saber to fight and get hurt, we finally get a few scenes where they compromise and Saber decides to teach him how to fight. He stubbornly convinces Saber that he's not the only one that should be in combat. She agrees to teach him sword fighting technique. In addition, Rin teaches him disciplines and magic, focusing on the one skill she knows he's talented in.
Reinforcement magic is beginner stuff compared to projection magic.
Projection? What's that about?
Well, in a very simple explanation, it duplicates things. The duplicated object is made entirely out of your own mana, so the degree of difficulty is much higher.
As I said before, Shiro has the ability to feel an object and understand its material makeup. Rin feels like that with enough practice, Shiro could actually copy the materials of an item and replicate it using magic, and with enough practice, could even do it from memory.
She gives him a gem to unlock his magic circuits that have laid dormant and unused like atrophied muscles his entire life.
So you managed to open your magic circuit. How long did it take Rin?
Admittedly, Archer doesn't have many scenes with Shiro, but the few scenes he does have, he makes a habit of accosting him for his foolish idealism, also lending some advice on how Shiro can optimally utilize his limited set of skills.
When it comes to fighting, Shiro Emiya doesn't have a prayer. Nothing you do is going to put you on par with a servant. The only thing you can do is visualize. If you face an opponent you cannot defeat, then visualize something that will allow you to defeat him. This is the only skill you have, so I suggest you perfect it.
The next morning, Shiro gets a phone call from Shinji at the school, asking him to come there so he can give him some important information, and like an idiot, he hurries there on his own. He arrives only to find the school empty, and Shinji activates the magic barrier.
What the hell was that?
Shinji makes it pretty clear here that the only reason why he's doing this is because Shiro and Rin both respectfully turned down his offer for an alliance, which does give us the idea that he doesn't really want to hurt them, and he's also very insecure about his ability to fight on his own.
If things had happened differently, Shinji may not have even wanted to hurt Shiro or Rin at all, but clearly he's jealous about their superior servants and fighting style, not to mention the enormous amount of pressure he's under considering the Mato family's magic lineage is starting to run dry. He's put under a lot of pressure to become a competent master even though he's clearly not capable of doing so.
This point only serves to make Shinji an interesting character. It does not serve to make him a sympathetic character. Understanding a character and justifying them are two completely different things, and understanding Shinji on every level is still not enough to justify some of the horrible things that he does. This point will come up again when we get to Heaven's Feel.
Facing certain death from Rider, Shiro finally uses a command seal and orders Saber to his side. The command seal carries an inordinate amount of magic and is capable of performing feats well beyond the servant's normal abilities.
Shinji! Get out of here! Stay away from me!
Why is it that every anime character named Shinji's gotta be a little bitch?
Saber has them completely outmatched, so Rider shuts down the Blood Fort Andromeda and uses one of her secret techniques to escape with Shinji. Thankfully, everyone at the school is safe, but the chase is now on. Shinji must be defeated. When everyone returns home, we get a brief discussion about the different classifications of noble phantasms. The various different anime adaptations all have a different way of explaining what a noble phantasm is, but the most correct way to explain it is it's a manifestation of that hero's legend, and it can take many forms. It can be a legendary weapon like Lancer's Gay Bolg, it can be an attack derived from a famous event that occurred in their life, or a passive ability like Hercules in his multiple lives. Offensive noble phantasms can also have various different types, such as anti-personnel, anti-army, anti-fortress, and so on. Shiro theorizes that Shinji will try to set up the Blood Fort again in the middle of the city, so they head out and search for him. There's a rather endearing scene where they stop to rest in the park due to Shiro starting to fatigue. We get some kind of fan-servicey moments with Saber, but they're brief enough to be cute and not overstay their welcome. Saber also gets to learn more about Shiro's ideology, and even she tells him it's foolish to be completely selfless and only put others before yourself always.
The eagle-eyed viewers, or those of you that have seen Fate Zero, know that this is a lesson that she herself had to learn the hard way.
The two finally locate Rider in the city. Her and Saber engage in a kick-ass fight scene. When Rider reaches the top of the skyscraper, she summons a phantasmal creature that will serve as her mount. Obviously, being it's a Pegasus, she has significant terrain advantage in the sky. This scene is one of many that goes to extraneous detail to replicate certain frames from the visual novel. It blends them a lot more seamlessly into the scene than some of the other moments in the anime do, and it really makes this fight scene from the visual novel come to life. Saber realizes that from up here she can use her ultimate attack without the risk of collateral damage, and decides to deploy her own noble phantasm. For real this time.
You know, Ryder, I too find being up this high to be advantageous. You see, up here I don't have to worry about scorching the earth with my flames!
Tactical nuke incoming!
Excalibur!
And with that, Ryder is vaporized, and the exhausted Saber collapses.
It's at this point onward that the story really starts to get good, and it ramps up the action and keeps everything in high gear, and doesn't play around for the rest of the story.
Shiro rushes Saber home to let her rest. That night he has a dream that appears to be a glimpse into Saber's memories and past, introducing us to the concept that servants and masters share dreams with each other and can see into each other's memories.
If you couldn't tell by the name of the sword that Saber exclaimed when she revealed it last night, the dreams pretty much solidify that Saber is in fact King Arthur. This is one of the reasons why I defend this particular watch order. The story of Fate Stay Night wants the identity of King Arthur to be a secret until it's revealed to the character and the viewer. Fate Zero, on the other hand, reveals this immediately at the very beginning. Why would you want to spoil that for yourself? Now granted, that story worked with that being established from the beginning because of how the characters interacted. In this story, it works out better to have it be a secret until it's revealed to the main character. Fate Zero was made at a time where Fate Stay Night already existed, so the people that went to read the light novel or watch the anime were expected to already know this because they watched or read Fate Stay Night. Again, why would you reverse this obviously intended order?
With that tangent out of the way, Shiro realizes that Saber isn't recovering, and he'll have to do something drastic to allow her to start receiving mana from him like she could if he was a competent master. Obviously, he would never ethically allow Saber to consume a human soul to absorb mana, but he's running out of ideas and time. He decides to take a walk to clear his mind and think about it. This ends up being a terrible mistake as he ends up being approached by Berserker's master, Illya. Illya's not playing nice this time around as she paralyzes him with magic and kidnaps him.
Saber's gonna be gone pretty soon, so let's just hurry up and get this over. Sweet dreams, Shiro.
I plan to talk a lot more about Illya when we get to the Season 2 video, so just bear with me for now. I'm not going to go into too much detail about her character.
Rin and Saber realize he's not coming back and start to search for him. Illya has Shiro tied up in her mansion and wants to turn him into a puppet, so to speak. Her motivations for doing so aren't apparent in this route or this route's adaptation, but we'll go into detail later. She reveals during this interrogation that she finished off and killed Shinji yesterday right after the fight, even though his servant had already been defeated.
Great job, Illya, you're doing us all proud.
Shiro is finally able to activate that magic jewel that Rin gave him earlier and is able to escape his imprisonment, getting ready to do his best reenactment of Resident Evil 1.
Don't move! Shiro.
Saber!
Rin and Saber manage to infiltrate the castle undetected and find Shiro quickly. Thinking that Illya stepped out of the castle, they try to exit right through the front door, only to be confronted by her. Archer knows he's the only one with enough strength to fend off Berserker for any amount of time, so he offers to stay behind so they can make a clean getaway.
Let's be clear on something here. If all you want me to do is buy you time, I can do that. However, would you be disappointed if I just destroyed him instead?
Hell yeah! Archer, one of the coolest characters, is finally gonna get his moment of badass.
This fight is awesome. One of the many things we would never get if we were locked into the first-person perspective of the main character like in the visual novel. Things aren't going so well for Archer though, as he realizes he doesn't have the physical strength to match Berserker. See, servants have base stats for their different attributes much like an RPG character would have. Berserkers typically have some of the highest strength, and Archer, well, being an archer, doesn't nearly have as high a stats to match him with. Archer manages to land several fatal attacks, but Berserker still stands.
My defeat may be inevitable, but you'll still have to work for it, Berserker.
Archer's getting ready to unleash his ultimate attack. Berserker's finished now.
I call forth unlimited blade works. As you can see, what you face are unlimited blades, the pinnacle of weaponry. Well, what are you waiting for?
Whew, wow. That, that took a long time. Hope that part 2 will come out much quicker, and it will not be nearly as long of a video, but boy does that feel good to finally have this thing out. Wow. Not just how long it took to make, but just how long I had been sitting on these thoughts and these ideas, and how good it feels to finally put them in one place and get some feedback to bounce off of it. So I cannot appreciate you guys enough for the continued support. This series is still going in full steam. I'm really hoping to see some further engagement with this part, hopefully than the previous one. I really, really appreciate you guys watching and taking the time to support this. All of the likes that I got on the previous video were just incredible. So I really, really do. I just have no words for it. But this is so liberating. I'm probably going to start writing the Fate Zero script soon, and hopefully have that filmed before AWA. Granted, the AWA is later in the year this year than it typically is, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, the part 2 of Deen should be out pretty soon. It will definitely be after Dragon Con, but it will be soonish. I'm going to write the script and start recording that now, and hopefully give you guys an update pretty soon. So thank you guys so much again for supporting this. I really, really do appreciate it.